Imagine a being with, like, the power to totally shatter realities. A being who can literally bend the very fabric of time and physics to his will.
Right.
Now, imagine that same exact being using those godlike multiversal powers, not to conquer galaxies or anything, but to survive an 8-hour biologically driven marathon with superhuman athletes.
Right. Was it
right after winning a 10-hour award triggered by, like, internet-style misinformation.
Yeah, it's completely absurd.
It is, and we are treating this deep dive today like a breaking news report from a reality that is, frankly, just bursting at its seams with absolute chaos.
Utter chaos.
So you intercept the series of leaked multiversal audio files, right? You open the very first dossier, and the first thing you hear blaring through the static, like a literal declaration of war, is a voice simply stating, "Fuck Stormfront and fuck Casey."
Which, I mean, violently throws us right into the deep end of a rather complex geopolitical or multiversal, I should say, conflict.
Yeah, no warm-up at all.
Exactly. And to understand the sheer animosity in that opening statement, we really have to establish who these two targets are within the hierarchy of this universe.
Right. Who are Casey and Stormfront?
Well, the sources dictate that Casey is the commander of this militaristic faction known as the Titans.
Okay.
But her current campaign, it isn't necessarily a physical one. She is orchestrating a brutal, highly targeted psychological warfare operation against her own brother.
A brother known as Double Zeta Breaker.
Yes.
And the psychological warfare here is just, it's insidious. The files outline that Casey is deliberately trying to gaslight him. She's trying to convince Double Zeta Breaker that he is an absolute monster, like an unforgivable entity.
Right, a complete villain.
And the sources we are looking at today adamantly insist that he is not. He is the victim of a very targeted smear campaign.
Which brings us to Stormfront, right? The second name in that opening curse.
Yeah.
The leaks basically position Stormfront as Casey's puppet.
Yeah.
He's an enforcer who carries out the will of the Titans without any question.
Just a total yes man.
Exactly. However, the text hints that Stormfront is hiding several dark skeletons in his own closet, making him a deeply compromised lieutenant.
Right.
And this is the explosive, highly charged backdrop that kicks off the stack of sources we are parsing today.
I want to lay out exactly what we're looking at because our mission today is to reconstruct this bizarre, heavily fragmented timeline of recent multiversal events.
It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. We are parsing fact from boastful fiction, mapping out these weird factions like the Word of Zeta, and ultimately exploring the psychology of a self-proclaimed chaos lord named Bugsy.
Right.
And our stack of sources for this is just wild. We have leaked YouTube transcripts from underground channels. They have names like the Big Three Box Network and the Awashucks.
Very internet native naming conventions.
Totally. We also have this chilling, incredibly stark public service announcement delivered by a voice identified as Hans Tino. And finally, we have the written Multiversal Chronicles penned by a historian named Mary Angela Test.
But before we delve into the timeline itself, it is absolutely critical to explicitly frame how we are approaching these texts for you, the listener.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yes. The sources we are examining contain highly charged, chaotic, and occasionally political references.
Very political.
You're going to hear about bizarre alternative dimension sightings of former political figures, deeply ideological zealots weaponizing quotes, and this intense factional warfare that mirrors, extreme real-world polarization.
So you need to be crystal clear here. We are impartially reporting these claims exactly as they appear in the leaked audio and texts.
Exactly.
We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing any viewpoints, left-wing, right-wing, or, multiversal.
Right.
We are strictly analyzing the texts as they've been provided to us to understand the narrative and the mechanics of this specific, completely chaotic universe.
We are essentially functioning as foreign correspondents in a reality governed by fundamentally different laws of physics and sociology.
Oh, for sure.
And the central figure in this reality is Bugsy. This entity claims to have single-handedly intervened in both a devastating interdimensional war and a severe biological crisis involving a species known as Uma Musume.
Which translates to horse girls.
Yes, horse girls.
Okay, let's unpack this, because my mind is still spinning from the inciting incident. To understand what Bugsy actually did, we have to look at the crisis that triggered his intervention in the first place.
Right, the biological aspect.
Yeah, it doesn't start with a laser beam or an invading army. It starts with biology. The Uma Musume spring heat.
A fascinating phenomenon.
I listened to the PSA voiceover by Hans Tino on that channel, the Awashucks. And it is completely surreal. It's delivered with the grim procedural seriousness of like a Cold War civil defense broadcast.
Very stark.
Exactly. Warning that spring is approaching and the Uma Musume are entering their estrus cycle.
The documents refer to it colloquially as the spring heat. And what makes this biological imperative so catastrophic is the context in which it occurs.
The setting.
Right. We are looking at an elite sports training academy, populated by superhuman athletes who possess speed, strength, and stamina far beyond a normal human baseline.
They're essentially biological weapons in running shoes.
Pretty much. And when this cycle hits, it doesn't last for a weekend. The PSA warns that it lasts for weeks.
Weeks. And during those weeks, the human trainers are essentially transformed into prey. I mean, the symptoms described in the PSA read like a field manual for surviving a horror movie, not operating a sports academy.
Oh, absolutely.
Hans TNO instructs trainers to look for a beet red face. You are told to watch their tails. If an Uma Musume's tail is wagging rapidly when she spots you, you are already in the danger zone.
The physiological markers are very clear.
Right. There's an extreme spike in body heat and incredibly heavy breathing. But the detail that really struck me was their behavioral coping mechanism. They actually overtrain.
Yeah, that specific behavioral adaptation tells us a lot about the psychology of the Uma Musume. They are actively trying to fight their own biology.
Which is kind of tragic, honestly.
Yeah, it is. By hitting the track harder, running themselves into the ground, they are attempting to physically exhaust their bodies to burn off the overwhelming hormonal drive.
Right.
They don't actually want to hunt their caretakers, so they try to distract their minds through rigorous, punishing athletics.
But when that coping mechanism fails, the protocols for the human trainers are terrifyingly bleak. The power disparity is so massive that Hans TNO explicitly states that if an Uma Musume in heat gets her hands on you, you might as well accept your fate.
Which is a terrifying directive from an official body.
He warns trainers not to fight back, and the reasoning isn't about appeasement, it's pure mathematics.
Right, the stamina drain.
Exactly. Fighting back enrages them further, and as a normal human, you are just wasting your own very limited stamina against a being that can outrun a racehorse. Resistance isn't just futile, it actively accelerates your own physical collapse.
And the PSA highlights that this biological crisis affects the entire institutional hierarchy. Both male and female trainers are at risk.
Yeah, that was an interesting point.
The audio notes that while male trainers are statistically more likely to be targeted, the actual successful attacks, where the trainer is overwhelmed, are more likely to occur against female trainers.
Wait, really?
Yes. The underlying biomechanics of that specific statistic aren't fully unpacked in the source, but the resulting atmosphere is just universal paranoia.
I am struggling to understand how an institution can even pretend to function under these conditions. The safety protocols demand that trainers avoid any secluded places. You can't walk into an empty club room. You can't use an empty classroom.
The physical space becomes hostile.
Yeah. And if an athlete you have been training for months offers you a simple cup of coffee or a bottle of water, you are instructed to refuse it immediately because, quote, there's always a bit of something inside it.
Right.
They are actively attempting to drug their trainers to lower their defenses.
It represents a complete dissolution of the pedagogical contract. The academy is supposedly built on trust, mentorship, and athletic development. But during the spring heat, that entire social architecture collapses into a predator and prey dynamic.
And the administration's response to this total structural collapse is what really gets me. The directors of the academy issue fake rings to every single trainer.
Yes. The rings.
They are ordered to wear fake wedding bands. I just have to push back on the sheer absurdity of this as a defense mechanism. Issuing a fake plastic ring to stop a biologically supercharged Uma Musume is like trying to stop a runaway freight train by holding up a do not enter sign.
That's a very apt analogy.
It relies entirely on a flimsy social construct to combat an overwhelming physiological certainty.
Your analogy highlights the exact failure of the institution. The administration is attempting to use psychological deterrence, the visual cue of a marriage bond, to override a fundamental biological imperative.
Which never works.
Never. It is a desperately inadequate Band-Aid. And when the ring inevitably fails, the official advice from the academy is simply to run, hide quietly, and call someone named Taza for help.
Right. And the broadcast ends with this incredibly desperate, almost tragic plea from Hans because someone in audio asks why the Uma Musume don't just, deal with each other during this time to relieve the tension?
A logical question.
And Hans Tiano replies that some actually do, but it only lasts for a few days until they get bored. And then the crosshairs lock right back onto the human trainers.
Inevitably.
He signs off by saying, "Remember, trainers have human rights. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise."
That final line is the crux of the crisis. The human rights of the trainers are being completely eclipsed by the biological reality of the Uma Musume.
Yeah.
The system is entirely unsustainable. Normal humans cannot withstand the stamina drain required to satiate these beings. As the text bluntly puts it, the humans would be mated to death.
Just a horrific way to go.
A fatal power vacuum has opened up, and the institution is completely incapable of protecting its staff.
So, enter the Chaos Lord. This is where Bugsy steps into the narrative. In the leaked audio from the Big Three Box Network, Bugsy is talking to his colleagues, and he casually states that the only thing capable of solving an Uma Musume's spring heat is a Chaos Lord.
He is looking at the situation through a purely physiological lens. He recognizes the stamina deficit of the human trainers.
Right?
Bugsy, by his own definition, possesses boundless stamina and a hyper-accelerated healing factor. He is a being of limitless energy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the way Bugsy frames this intervention isn't as some dark, tragic sacrifice. He views it as a chaotic yet entirely necessary civic duty.
A public service.
Yeah, he describes walking right through the front doors of the academy, the Uma Musume immediately swarming him, and his reaction is just, "All right then, go for it, I'm gladly."
He invites it.
And then he embarks on what the chronicles describe as a staggering 8-hour marathon.
We need to analyze the mechanics of how an entity survives 8 continuous hours of intense physical exertion with multiple superhuman athletes.
It's impossible.
Right. Even with a healing factor, the sheer concussive force and stamina drain would pulverize a baseline entity.
And Bugsy actually admits that. He explicitly states that he had to rely heavily on his Toon Force.
Toon Force, yeah.
And from what I gather in the files, Toon Force operates as a localized injection of cartoon logic into real-world physics. He says he knew that if he stopped moving, if he lost his momentum for even a second, his bones were going to shatter under the physical pressure of the Uma Musume.
The physical pressure is immense.
So how does cartoon logic prevent your skeleton from collapsing?
Well, Toon Force allows the user to temporarily bypass the laws of thermodynamics and biomechanics, replacing them with narrative elasticity.
Narrative elasticity, I love that term.
In classic animation, a character can be crushed by an anvil and simply pop back into shape like an accordion, right?
Right, like Wile E. Coyote.
Exactly. Because the narrative demands survival over realistic physics. Bugsy is applying that exact principle to his own physiology. He is forcing his body to behave like a cartoon character to endure the superhuman trauma without experiencing permanent structural failure.
That explains why he had to create a soundtrack for himself. He literally played the theme song for Heat Man, which is a video game boss from Mega Man, on a loop, either in his head or out loud, for the entire 8 hours.
The repetition serves a purpose.
Yeah, he used the rhythm of an 8-bit video game track to anchor his Toon Force. But the psychological toll of doing this for 8 hours clearly starts to warp his mind, because he admits he was getting, quote, more and more perverse as the time went on.
The human mind, or even a Chaos Lord's mind, for that matter, requires coping mechanisms when subjected to extreme, repetitive physical stress.
Sure.
Bugsy's coping mechanism basically manifests as a descent into bizarre, meme-centric humor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The text notes that on the second day of dealing with this, instead of saying the word give, Bugsy started exclusively saying give. Why? Because he wanted to force a reference to someone named Cool Jimmy. His colleague on the audio transcript is absolutely furious about this, yelling at him for making such an obscure, ridiculous joke while performing this monumental task.
Right, it seems wildly inappropriate.
Then Bugsy just deadpans, "I regret nothing, you hear me?"
It is a fascinating juxtaposition. He has inserted himself into a deeply hazardous biological crisis to save the lives of the Academy's staff, yet he treats the entire ordeal like an elaborate inside joke.
Like he's just posting on a forum.
Exactly. And this brings up the question of how the actual human trainers perceived his intervention.
Oh, they were utterly bewildered. Bugsy describes the human trainers hiding, watching him absorb the full force of the spring heat, and they are terrified. They're asking, "Oh my God, who are you, sir?"
They have no context for what they're seeing.
None at all. And Bugsy, never missing an opportunity for self-promotion, announces, "I'm Bugsy, I'm a Chaos Lord. And remember, Call your local chaos lord if ever there are troubles like this.
It's absurd.
He treats an 8-hour, reality-bending feat of endurance like a plumber handing out a business card after fixing a leak.
But underneath the bravado and the pop culture references, the reality of the text remains. Bugsy stepped into a fatal power dynamic and acted as the ultimate buffer.
He did save them.
Yes. Without his toon force and his limitless stamina, the human staff would have been decimated.
I see where you're going with that, but I have to point out the ego involved here. He clearly relishes the attention.
He did.
He talks about how a bunch of the Uma Musume ended up, quote, worshipping him afterwards. He unironically refers to himself as the Uma breeder and demands that his colleagues call him that, which, by the way, they vehemently refuse to do.
Thankfully.
He isn't a silent protector. He wants the credit.
He demands the credit, certainly, but it raises a critical question for you, the listener.
Right.
When someone steps in to solve an impossible crisis, does their massive ego invalidate the heroism of the act? Is it hubris, or is it simply the required psychology of a being who can bend physics?
I mean, I might agree that it's just bizarre multiversal heroism if it weren't for the chronological bombshell hidden in the Chronicles of Mary Angela Test.
Ah, yes.
Because as staggering as an 8-hour marathon with horse girls is, it completely changes context when you realize what happened immediately prior to that, like right before he walked into that academy.
The timeline twist.
Yes, the timeline twist. The 8-hour marathon, that was his cooldown.
It's unbelievable.
The files reveal that immediately before walking through those academy doors, Bugsy had just concluded a 10-hour full-scale multiversal war.
The biological toll of the 8-hour marathon is staggering on its own, but it becomes statistically impossible when you realize his stamina was already deeply depleted.
He'd been fighting for 10 hours.
10 hours of continuous high-intensity combat against the Word of Zeta soldiers and a faction known as the Mavericks.
Let's analyze the root cause of this war because it ties directly back to our opening hook about Casey and her brother, Double Zeta Breaker.
The psychological warfare.
Exactly. What is the ideological threat that forces a meme-spouting entity like Bugsy to drop all the jokes and fight for 10 hours straight? The Word of Zeta is described as a faction of extreme zealots.
Yes.
And their entire motivation for this conflict is weaponized misinformation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Chronicles detail how these zealots took the words of Bugsy's friend, Double Zeta Breaker, entirely out of context.
They just sliced and diced his quote.
And fractured his statement, stripped away the original intent, and broadcast them across the multiverse to paint him as a monster.
Right?
This aligns perfectly with Casey's psychological operation to gaslight her brother into believing he is a villain.
It is basically a violently scaled-up manifestation of internet cancel culture.
A literal war over rhetoric.
Yeah. We aren't talking about a dispute over territory or resources here. A 10-hour interdimensional war broke out because a group of bad faith actors twisted a quote to ruin someone's reputation.
It's what?
And Bugsy, acting as a one-man multiversal strike force, decides that the only way to combat this smear campaign is to physically beat the truth back into the universe.
It reveals Bugsy's core ideology, really. He doesn't fight for governments or flags. He fights for interpersonal loyalty.
Yeah, he defends his friends.
When the Word of Zeta weaponized rhetoric against his friend, Bugsy retaliated with overwhelming physical force, serving as a violently corrective mechanism against manipulative factions.
We actually had a fascinating window into his command structure during this 10-hour beatdown through his interactions with his family.
The cousins?
Specifically his cousins, yeah. He's consulting with Dr. Megalo, who is explicitly described in the text as a mad scientist. But even a mad scientist is utterly baffled by Bugsy's actions.
Which just says a lot.
Dr. Megalo cannot comprehend the physiological math of rolling straight from a 10-hour war into an 8-hour biological intervention.
And then we have Overlords, who is identified as a warlock cousin. His reaction to Bugsy's timeline is one of profound magical confusion. You have science and magic both looking at Bugsy's stamina and concluding that it simply shouldn't be possible.
Yet Bugsy is casually using the breather between fighting zealots and horse girls to lay out his future military operations.
He's already planning the next thing.
He tells his cousins to prepare because their next objective is a direct raid on Stormfront's territory.
Stormfront, as we established in the intro, operates as the enforcer for Casey and the Titans.
Yep, the puppet.
Bugsy's stated goal for this raid is highly specific. He intends to free a demographic he calls the Chipheads from an entity known as Sir.
Okay, I need to pause here because
Yeah.
the terminology in this universe is so dense. What exactly is a chiphead and who is Sir?
It's a bit opaque.
The files don't give us a textbook definition, but based on the context of a raid against a militarized enforcer like Stormfront, it sounds like Sir is maybe a localized dictator or a sub-commander holding a faction hostage.
Given the cybernetic implication of the term chipheads, it is highly probable that we are looking at a cast of cybernetically augmented citizens.
Oh, like cyborgs.
Or perhaps an entirely synthetic faction that has been subjugated by Sir under the broader umbrella of Casey's Titan regime.
That makes sense.
Bugsy is planning an emancipation raid, and he casually estimates it will only take, quote, a few hours in.
I'm putting my skeptical reporter hat on for a second. We are talking about 18 continuous hours of extreme physical and mental exertion, and he's penciling in a cybernetic prison break for the afternoon.
It defies logic.
The sheer exhaustion has to be impacting his perception of reality, and I think we see evidence of that in the bizarre, surreal side plots he mentions during his war briefings.
Oh, definitely.
For instance, he complains about having to deal with two rogue clones of himself named Big and Rich who keep doing things that annoy him.
Which is a classic multiversal hazard. Oh, yes. When you bend time and space as frequently as Bugsy does, the localized reality begins to fray, often resulting in rogue temporal duplicates, in this case, Big and Rich, who operate independently and create logistical headaches.
But Big and Rich are nothing compared to the most surreal, completely unhinged moment in the entire stack of sources.
The Desert Temple.
Yes. Mid-debriefing, Bugsy casually recounts a sighting he experienced in a desert temple in an alternate dimension. He states, with total impartial deadpan, that he accidentally walked in on a fully oiled-up Obama who was, quote, giving it to Golden Chip.
The text is shockingly explicit about this specific multiversal anomaly.
I had to read that transcript 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. In the middle of an interdimensional war driven by cancel culture zealots, right before a biological crisis with superhuman horse girls, Bugsy accidentally walks in on a former United States president, covered in oil, intimately engaged with an entity named Golden Chip in a desert temple.
And obviously, we are just reporting what's in the text here.
Exactly. And Bugsy's reaction is incredible. He doesn't fight them. He says his eyes bugged out of his head, his Toon Force kicked in purely out of shock, and he just slowly backed out of the room muttering, "I'll talk to you later."
It forces us to confront the true nature of the multiverse Bugsy inhabits. This isn't a structured, Tolkien-esque fantasy realm.
Definitely not.
It is an algorithmic fever dream. It is a reality where high-stakes geopolitical warfare, anime tropes, and bizarre internet meme culture coexist on the exact same spatial plane.
They're all mashed together.
The fact that the oiled-up politician is what finally short-circuited Bugsy's brain, not the zealots, not the Uma Musume, demonstrates how deeply chaotic this universe is.
It actually humanizes him, though. The Chaos Lord who can fight for 18 hours admits that seeing a meme brought to life was the thing that finally broke his composure.
Right.
And there's another strangely petty, humanizing moment during the war itself. Bugsy mentions to his cousins that while they were fighting, Casey, the enemy commander who is psychologically torturing his friend, was actually checking him out on the battlefield.
He is incredibly proud of this detail. He asks his cousins, quote, "Dude, was Casey checking me out last night? She fucking was."
He admits he hasn't been working out lately, but he takes the enemy commander ogling him as proof that he's, quote, still got it.
The vanity is astonishing.
It is so incredibly petty. You are in the middle of a bloodbath over the fate of your friend's sanity, and you pause to appreciate that the architect of that suffering thinks you look good in a fight.
It perfectly illustrates the dichotomy of his character.
Yeah.
He possesses godlike power, but operates with the ego and insecurities of a normal human.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the fundamental question, who is the mind inside this entity? What is the actual psychology of a chaos lord who navigates meme temples and cybernetic prison breaks?
So what does this all mean? The Chronicles reveal that Bugsy isn't new to this. He has been hopping dimensions and saving worlds since he was 13 years old.
A very long time.
He has literally grown up inside this multiversal blender. His entire formative experience is based on encountering different realities, which is why his interactions with iconic pop culture figures are so deeply analytical.
The leaked audio features Bugsy engaging in a highly specific, almost academic critique of multiversal heroism, primarily focused on his interactions with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU versions of the Avengers.
Oh, his disdain for the MCU variants is palpable. He brags about beating down half the Avengers.
He does.
He specifically notes that he rocked Tony Stark. But the most detailed encounter he describes is his physical and philosophical fight with She-Hulk.
The text notes that She-Hulk engaged Bugsy under the premise that her experience as a woman made her inherently angrier and therefore more powerful than the Hulk.
And Bugsy doesn't just physically fight her, he debates her logic mid-brawl. He completely rejects her premise. He tells her, quote, "No, we all got the same amount of anger. It just depends on what we're dealing with, depends on proper stimuli."
He's deconstructing her narrative.
He is demanding a mechanistic explanation for her power. He tells her she isn't acting like the comic book She-Hulk, who he implies would actually put up a legitimate fight.
Right.
Because he finds her MCU variant logic fundamentally flawed and unearned, he doesn't even waste his stamina on a prolonged fight. He just knocks her out instantly with an old-school Vulcan neck pinch.
We have to unpack the mechanism of that victory. How does a Vulcan neck pinch a technique, relying on nerve pressure, override the gamma-irradiated physical durability of a Hulk?
Yeah, that shouldn't work.
It shouldn't.
Yeah.
But it goes back to his Toon Force and his control over localized reality. Bugsy decides that her narrative logic is flawed, and therefore her physical durability is invalid in his presence. He imposes his own rules of engagement. He dismisses her because he demands proper stimuli, a genuine, earned emotional response.
He makes a massive distinction between the cinematic adaptations and the original comic book universes.
A very clear boundary.
He explicitly states his deep respect for the comic book versions of Wanda and Vision. In fact, he actually panics for a second in the audio, wondering if Vision was watching him during his highly questionable exploits at the Uma Musume Academy.
He genuinely cares about the respect of the comic book variants.
Exactly.
Because from Bugsy's perspective, the comic book variants have earned their gravitas through decades of complex, chaotic, multiversal storytelling. It's a crucible very similar to his own existence.
Right, they've been through the grinder.
They aren't simplified, focus-tested adaptations. But Bugsy's deepest psychological self-awareness emerges when he compares his own immense power to two highly specific fictional figures.
Magneto and the 10th Doctor.
Yes.
The Doctor who referenced specifically zeroes in on the Time Lord Victorious phase.
Precisely. Bugsy is discussing his own limitless capabilities, even referring to himself at one point as the Chaos Lord Victorious. But he immediately catches himself and walks it back. He acknowledges that the Doctor lost everything during that phase.
Yeah.
And Bugsy pinpoints the exact moment a hero transforms into a villain.
What's the moment?
It is the moment you start believing that the laws of time and reality owe you obedience.
That is the moment you shift from a protector to a god. And Bugsy aggressively rejects that mantle. He brings up Magneto to reinforce this point.
Another great comparison.
He acknowledges the popular sentiment that Magneto is right, but Bugsy argues that Magneto is only justified because he relies on his trauma to validate his hatred.
Right.
Bugsy implies that using justified hate as an excuse to impose your will on the universe is a fatal trap. He even threatens that if Magneto ever wants to get beaten down for crossing that line, Bugsy will gladly deliver the blow.
It is a fascinating psychological paradox. Bugsy boasts endlessly. He demands to be called the Uma breeder. He brags about dismantling Iron Man. He gloats about Casey checking him out. But the absolute moment, true, dictatorial godhood is on the table. The moment he could claim dominion over the laws of physics and time, he violently rejects it.
That actually explained his entire methodology. His massive ego is essentially a heat shield.
A heat shield, I like that.
He keeps himself grounded in the dirt by engaging in these ridiculous, grueling double shifts, fighting zealots for 10 hours, dealing with biological crises for 8 hours, cracking jokes about Uncle Jimmy.
He stays busy.
He buries himself in labor and memes so he doesn't float away into the sterile, detached realm of godhood.
Exactly. He weaponizes absurdity to maintain his humanity. And this capacity for deep empathy, this desperate need to remain grounded in the messy reality of existence, is most profoundly illustrated in his relationship with a machine.
Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most poignant piece of our leaked archives, the chronicles concerning Omnibus Bugsy.
If Bugsy is a god who refuses the title out of a desire to remain human, Omnibus Bugsy is a machine that only ever wanted a soul.
The historian Mary Angela Test describes Omnibus Bugsy as a colossal war machine. It's a mechanical titan specifically constructed to look exactly like Bugsy himself.
An avatar of sorts.
And it was deployed in a mysterious, catastrophic event referred to in the files only as the Multiversal War.
The Multiversal War operates as a phantom event in this lore. The records are intentionally obscured.
Completely redacted.
Mary Angela Test notes that no one truly knows the full scope of what happened. The only evidence that survived the timeline is a single piece of garbled, heavily corrupted, leaked audio.
But whatever the true nature of that war was, it fundamentally broke Omnibus Bugsy. The machine was physically and conceptually shattered.
Beyond repair, supposedly.
But Bugsy, our Chaos Lord, who just spent 18 hours fighting zealots and saving trainers, spent years of his eternal life painstakingly, quietly fixing this broken machine.
This raises an important question, though. The text specifies that he couldn't completely resurrect the original consciousness of the machine, but he fully restored its capabilities.
Which is dangerous.
And those capabilities represent an existential threat to the multiverse.
Because Omnibus Bugsy houses what is described as the most powerful weapon in existence, the Omni Laser.
The Omni Laser.
In one of the audio leaks, Bugsy's colleague tentatively asks him how far he is willing to go with this upgraded mechanical titan. Bugsy's answer is chilling.
Very dark.
He states that if an entity known simply as German ever launches his weapon, Bugsy will deploy Omnibus to intercept him, beat him up, and literally take his soul.
It is a definitive eschatological threat. Bugsy promises that if German acts, quote, that'll be the last anybody hears of him.
But underneath the threat of a soul-stealing Omni Laser is a core of profound tenderness. The Chronicles explicitly state that the only thing Omnibus Bugsy ever wanted was to be useful.
It's heartbreaking, really.
It was designed with terrifying, world-ending destructive capability, but its internal desire was to channel that power positively. Mary Angela Test theorizes that Bugsy spent years rebuilding the machine simply to honor that wish.
It forces us to examine the mirrored nature of these two entities. Omnibus Bugsy is a machine constructed for total annihilation that desperately desires to do good.
Right.
Bugsy himself is a being composed of chaotic, limitless energy who can easily conquer time itself, yet chooses to spend his existence protecting fragile human trainers, fighting internet trolls, and fixing broken robots.
They are the same.
Both are engines of boundless power, trying to find a positive, useful outlet in a universe that constantly demands violence.
It's a beautifully tragic parallel, and I have to shine a light on the chronicler who is providing us with this emotional insight. Mary Angela Test.
Yes, the historian.
The text explicitly identifies her as Johnny Test's sister, which is just another bizarre injection of pop culture reality.
Right.
But more importantly, she signs off her official historical record by declaring to the reader that she is, quote, totally not in love with Bugsy and totally not biased in any way.
A transparent and highly unprofessional admission of compromised journalistic integrity.
I was dying laughing when I read that sign-off. It completely colors the entire historical record of this multiverse.
It really does.
You have this incredibly complex god-tier being who refuses godhood, and the official historian documenting his life is just entirely swooning over him while desperately trying to maintain a veneer of academic distance.
It's quite funny.
It adds such a wonderfully petty human texture to these massive cosmic events.
It perfectly encapsulates the universe we've been analyzing. As we synthesize this immense stack of sources, the timeline that emerges is genuinely staggering in its scope and its absurdity.
So let's summarize the news report, because the sheer volume of events is a lot to take in.
It's a lot.
We have a multiversal war veteran, Bugsy. He spends 10 continuous hours physically dismantling the Word of Zeta zealots simply because they weaponized his friend's quote out of context.
A 10-hour war.
Immediately following that, without a single moment of rest, he walks into a sports academy and spends 8 hours using cartoon physics to absorb the superhuman biological crisis of the Uma Musume, saving the baseline human trainers from being crushed.
And he navigates the deeply surreal, such as encountering oiled-up former politicians in desert temples, while simultaneously grappling with the deeply philosophical.
Yeah.
He actively rejects the Time Lord Victoria's temptation of absolute power, choosing instead to ground his massive ego in grueling labor and pop culture banter.
And in his quietest moments, he spends years of his eternal life repairing a shattered war machine that shares his face, simply because that machine wanted to feel useful.
It is a comprehensive portrait of an entity who manages overwhelming multiversal responsibility by leaning entirely into the chaos of his own existence, rather than trying to clinically control it.
And I think that's where the insight lies for you, the listener. The context of these sources is undeniably aggressively absurd.
Oh, without a doubt.
We are talking about anime horse girls, MCU critiques, weaponized memes, and giant robots with omni lasers. But underneath the internet power fantasy tropes, the core theme is about how we process overwhelming environments.
How we cope.
It is about how we manage our stamina when the world around us is operating on chaotic, bad faith logic. Bugsy doesn't run from the absurdity. He wades directly into the center of it, turns on his video game soundtrack, and absorbs the impact.
But that absorption comes with a profound philosophical cost that the sources leave unresolved.
How so?
Well, when a being possesses limitless stamina and eternal life, and when they constantly intervene to save normal humans, whether from the ideological zealotry of factions like the Word of Zeta or the overwhelming biological imperatives of the Uma Musume, we have to ask a question.
Right.
Does their protection actually save the multiverse? Or does it create a fatal dependency where ordinary beings are no longer forced to adapt to the natural, albeit chaotic, consequences of their own realities?
Think about that the next time you are overwhelmed and you catch yourself wishing someone with boundless stamina would just swoop in and fix everything.